So it's 7 o'clock, and I want to say good evening and welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight, the night before a bank holiday. So it's real commitment. Thank you very much. And as always, as I said to you before, please introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, tell us why you've decided to join our session. Are you interested in motivation in particular, or you've been to our training before? Have you been to our training on motivation, and things like that, anything you find relevant. And before I pass the microphone to Paul, I'll share my screen and as always give you just a little bit of background information. Show me thumbs up if you can see my screen, please. Yep, you can. Fantastic. I'll make it slightly bigger if it works. Yeah, there you go. So for those who have been, who joined us before for these sessions, you know that these sessions are organized by SDS Seminars. They are free. We've organized them very early in the lockdown, almost first week of the lockdown, because we felt that there was real need to stay connected. Because the sense of isolation, the sense of isolation, probably the best word, was quite overwhelming. And I think since then we've all found our networks, we've all found the ways to be connected, to carry on more or less with our daily routines. But nevertheless, we've decided to carry on with the sessions because they were well received. Clearly people were coming and were happy to join them and to learn something new. And today, the session will be on how to motivate your clients during COVID-19. And I can tell you a secret, because the topic of motivation is an absolute favorite topic of Paul Grantham. So I hope it'll be a really interesting and inspiring day and evening rather. And I really would like to hear maybe a couple of hints how to motivate ourselves, because in this situation, motivating clients is one thing, but keeping ourselves motivated is just as important, probably, if not more in some respect, because our clients depend on us for that. So last time we had a big audience. I like to show you this word clouds. We're getting international audience, but definitely people from all around the UK, lots of people from London, but from all around the UK and from Ireland and from many other places in the world. So if you're joining us from somewhere else in the world, welcome and thank you for joining us. And before I pass the microphone to Paul, I just wanted to say that Paul, as I said, it's his favorite topic. So he's written this book, Practical Approaches to Motivating Clients, a workbook of essential motivational skills for therapists. It's actually incredibly practical. I don't know how many of you have seen this book and read it, but it's really step-by-step, very practical recommendations about various motivational techniques. It's not just motivational interviewing, it's much broader. It goes well beyond it. So if you are interested, it's available on Amazon, I think all around the world, both on amazon.co.uk and on amazon.com. And also we have a course which Paul has delivered for many years, and now it's available as an online training. Motivational Interviewing and Beyond. It's a 2-day course. It's BPS approved. And the good thing about our online courses is that you can try the first chapter of all of our online courses absolutely free. You don't have to commit, you don't have to sign up, you just can go and see whether you like the course or not. So if you're interested in this topic, go and try this online course with Paul. And receive your BPS approved certificate. The only thing I want to say, if you are trying it for free, you won't be able to save your progress. Obviously, if you're not logged in as yourself, your progress can't be saved. But at least to see how the course looks, how does it sound, whether it's for you, it's a very, very good tool to deal with. So I'll stop sharing the screen, and hello, Leanne. See you again. And now I am passing the microphone to Paul Grantham. Paul, are you here? I can't see you anywhere.
I'm definitely here.
Right,
I'm
right.
definitely here.
Paul is there, and I definitely can hear you. Maybe slightly louder because it's that loud.
I'll shout.
Fantastic. So I'll pass microphone to Paul.
Okay. Thanks very much, Julia. Welcome, folks. Welcome to this. I was actually just thinking about the fact that here we are on the eve of a bank holiday, and this is going to be one of the first bank holidays, or the evenings before a bank holiday, when the roads must be almost totally clear, really. I hope that I can provide you with something which is of interest and entertaining, instead of what would be the normal celebrations. I mean, not that I still hope that you're having something that's going to be fun tomorrow, but obviously it's not as it might be, as I'm sure you're actually aware. The other thing I should say, Julia very briefly mentioned about she hoped that there would be some ideas here about how to motivate ourselves. There's some really good news on this, can I say, which is that everything we're going to be looking at over the next sort of 15-20 minutes is equally applicable to us as it is to our clients. And I just want to emphasize that point very briefly, because I think it's an important thing, which is that very often when our clients are having difficulties doing the things that they need to do, or which somebody else thinks that they need to do, there is a tendency, I think, to see their position as somehow or other rather unique, or the factors that influence that are quite unique. And that's not true. I mean, everything, the whole process of motivation really for our clients is no different from the process of motivation for us. So, as I say, everything we're going to be looking at over the next sort of 15 minutes or so is as applicable to us as it is to our clients. Now, client motivation is clearly not something which is just specific to the COVID-19 situation. I've got a long-standing interest in working with unmotivated clients, a whole range of folk from at one end of the spectrum, I guess, people who are quite depressed, and have difficulties motivating themselves to really do very much at all, through to people who don't think they've got a problem at all, but somebody else does. And not surprisingly, these folks are often folks that I might see who are mandated or sent or pressurized in some particular way to be seen, and obviously by definition aren't very motivated really to do anything about it. And then there's a lot of other folks, I think, who I might be working with, who probably would be better described as, in some way, shape or form, as ambivalent. You know, there's a part of them which basically says, yes, I really wish I could do the things that I know I need to do, but I'm not sure I believe I can actually do it. Or other people who would say, no, I know I need to do these things, sort of, but maybe it's not quite as big a deal as other people seem to think it is. So a whole range of folks who, to varying degrees, have issues around the question of motivation. As can I hasten to add, I'm sure we do. I'm sure everybody here at the moment can think of something which they would either like to be more motivated to do, or alternatively somebody else sort of has told them that they ought to be more motivated to do, and are having difficulties sort of grasping that. The situation, I think, with COVID-19 basically simply makes the whole situation at the moment regarding motivation more complicated. You know, folks are up against more things in terms of motivation, and in addition to that, they haven't got necessarily the same sorts of resources that are available to them. So just to run through some of the ways in which the situation is a bit trickier than it would be normally. For example, we know, generally speaking, that being motivated to do things is generally a lot easier when we have social support or a social group that's actually involved in that or is supporting us in that endeavor. And undoubtedly social isolation erodes that and makes it more difficult. On top of that, we may actually find that we are spending more time with people who, I hate to say it, may encourage us to actually be more unmotivated than we might be normally. So some obvious examples here that immediately come to mind is that approximately about 40 to 50% of the population at the moment say they've put on weight, for example, since lockdown started, and that's because everybody in the family is spending their time around the TV of an evening at the moment, snacking away, really. And obviously alcohol consumption has gone up as well, and if you've got other members of your family that are consuming that and you are trying not to, it's obviously trickier. So the whole issue of social support, either the lack of it, or alternatively, social support in the wrong direction, makes things much more complicated. I think another thing to bear in mind is that I know that people's situations vary considerably with this, but I think it's probably fair to say that for a lot of our clients, they feel that they have more things to worry about at the moment than they did beforehand. One of the things about worries, in inverted commas, is that basically worries equal additional or competing priorities. So to put this another way, whatever it is that you are working with your clients on or trying to work with them on, maybe beforehand or even during for the first time, the COVID-19 situation, it's quite possible that the priority that was originally given to that problem by your client has, in a sense, slipped down the list. It's not disappeared, but it hasn't got the same overwhelming priority that it had beforehand. And I think that gets compounded by the fact that if beforehand you were seeing your client, they came to you, for example, and they saw you in an office where they were without distraction regarding addressing their problem. The distractions, incidentally, will of course have occurred as soon as they left the office, but while they're at least with you, there's a period of time when that's the only priority. And for those of you, for example, that are seeing your clients through video methods like this in their own home, they lack that boundary, basically, between where all of these other competing demands are in their life and the time that they can actually spend with you. So that's just a couple of the things that actually make a difference. There's a range of other things that may well have cropped up as a result of the pandemic, which make things a bit more complicated. So I guess the key question is, which is of interest and importance to us above anything else, is what the heck do we do about it? Well, what I wanted to do was to give you a very, very simple framework in which to begin to think about and to ask questions in connection with your clients, and secondly, to give you some simple strategies, really, which will fit in with that particular framework. So the thing I want to concentrate on, first of all, is to emphasize the point that motivation for anybody, whether it's for us or whether it's for our clients, is really related to two particular factors. And these are two factors that really you need to be thinking about when you're looking at your client or you're bringing your client to mind. The first one relates to the question of desire. Basically, at the end of the day, nobody is motivated to do anything unless they have a desire to change their status quo. One of the implications of that, by the way, is that desire for it to exist means that somebody has to really, at the end of the day, be uncomfortable to some degree with their status quo. They have to be uncomfortable with their current position. And so undoubtedly, one of the key reasons why so many people actually have problems with motivation is that their current position, putting it very bluntly, is not uncomfortable enough. And I'm going to come back to that point in a minute and highlight a couple of factors in it and what you can do about it. The other thing that tends to influence whether people are motivated to do things really relates to what's called perceived self-efficacy, or to put it into plain language, whether the client believes that they can actually do it. So something might be very important to me, and I think, yeah, I've got a very, very strong desire to, for example, lose weight, or I've got a very strong desire to engage in certain types of therapeutic activity, but basically I don't believe that I can actually do it. So that issue of self-efficacy is also an important factor for a lot of folks in terms of whether they're motivated. So where do we start with this? Well, I think that the most important thing to emphasize is that both desire and self-efficacy are actually both subjective, and they can be changed by the client, and that change can be facilitated by you. And that change occurs through what I always consider to be an old friend in terms of a psychological principle, which is the process of selective attention, or what it is that somebody chooses to selectively attend to, what they choose to concentrate on. So let's just take that through in terms of its practical implications, first of all with the question of desire. For me or you or our clients to get motivated to do something, we need to have the desire to either have something which we currently haven't got, or alternatively, to get away from something that we've currently got that we don't like. Now, there is a slight tendency for many therapists to wish to concentrate on benefits, or to wish to concentrate on helping the client to focus on what it is that they would like to do, or be able to do, or to feel, or to have, or whatever, to concentrate on those particular things, rather than what are called the negative consequences that they want to get away from. There is a slight difficulty with this, which I can't really get into the detail of at the moment, but putting it briefly, benefits on the whole tend to be more significantly delayed than the loss of negative consequences. In other words, to get that benefit usually requires me to have to wait a lot longer. And on the whole, things that I have to wait for before I can either obtain them or get rid of them are on the whole not very motivational. So that's why, for example, weight loss is such an issue. Now, if it really was the case that I go out on a run and I come back and I've lost, a kilo, then fabulous, it wouldn't be an issue. But unfortunately, the gain that I actually wish to have from weight loss is something that's actually more delayed. And that crops up time and time again. If I'm working with somebody who is depressed and they want to become more motivated to get out of bed at a set time and to engage in certain activities, the benefit of feeling better as a result of that, which will undoubtedly come, the benefit of that is actually delayed. Generally speaking, getting rid of things which are unpleasant, on the whole, to begin with regards to motivation, are often much more immediate and they're much more powerful. So how do we begin, first of all, to explore these? And what can we do to actually increase that desire? What I'm going to do is just take you through a very simple template dialogue, really, that you might be able to have with your client. You could start off with a very simple, broad-based question. You could say to them, how do you like life to be different from the way it is at the moment? How do you feel about the fact that you're having to see me? So start off with something which is a very broad-based question, which allows the client to basically define the problem in their terms, which incidentally may be different from the terms that you've actually got. When you have got your answer, what you then do is you then need to help your client amplify that particular benefit or negative consequence in their own eyes by asking them a very simple follow-up question, which is, why is that a good thing if we're talking about the benefit, or why is that a bad thing if they're talking about a negative consequence? So let me just give you a way in which that conversation might go with a particular client. So I might be working with somebody who's very depressed, and I might say, you know, why for, I mean, obviously being depressed is not pleasant, but why for you is it a particular concern? How does it create a difficulty for you? And they say, well, I just can't do anything. You know, I don't want to hug my children. You know, I feel terrible about myself, and so on and so forth. And I say to my client, which of those things is actually for you the worst? And they say, oh, I think it's about the fact I can't even bear the idea of hugging my child. And I say to them, and why for you is not being able to hug your child such a bad thing? And they say, well, it's because I feel like I'm a really bad parent. And I say at that particular point, and that's something which you'd like not to feel. And they say, well, yeah, obviously I wouldn't like to feel it. And I say, well, what would you like to feel instead then? And they say, well, obviously I'd like to feel a good and loving parent. So I say, so for you, and notice the summary point that comes at the end here. So for you, it's really important to try and get to grips with this, because if you were to get to grips with this, you'll be able to hug your child more frequently, and you would feel that you're a better parent. Is that correct? And I'm just going to assume that they're going to say yes, although incidentally they might also say at this point, yes, but I don't think I can do it, which we're going to come on to in a minute. But they'll say yes. And I might want to amplify that further. I might say, well, if you were able to do these particular things, or if you were able to do this and you did feel that way about yourself, tell me about the sorts of things that you'd be able to do that are really important to you. So whatever the benefit is or the negative consequence, which the client themselves identifies, you can follow up and amplify it. And what's quite interesting about this is that this method of amplifying desire is something which I suspect all of us at some particular point have discovered for ourselves. I would guess that if you cast your mind back to a situation where you were thinking about giving up, or you were wondering about whether you could do something, but somehow or other you carried on. Even though, can I hasten to add, you carried on and you didn't necessarily believe that you could do it, the reason why that was the case was probably because you cognitively rehearsed the particular benefit that was important to you, that you wanted to have, or the particular negative consequence that the problem was currently creating for you that you wanted to get rid of. And that identification of benefit or negative consequence, and repeatedly cognitively rehearsing it, periodically revisiting it in therapy, increases desire. And this is the interesting thing about desire. Desire frequently trumps the effects of lack of belief and ability to do something. You know, there are many instances where actually I don't know whether I can do something, but the desire for it has become sufficiently strong for me. So that's one element. The other element, as I said, is self-efficacy. People's belief that they can't actually do something. Now, I mentioned to you earlier on about the role that selective attention actually plays in this. And one of the reasons why folks who have very low confidence, very low self-efficacy, tend to have that view of themselves is because on the whole, they tend to selectively attend to, for want of a better term, their failure experiences. They tend on the whole to selectively view what it is that they can't do, and that's where their attention goes to. So one of the key roles that therapists play, I think, is to actually enhance clients' perceptions of their ability to do things. Now, how do you do that? Well, one of the things that I guess a lot of people will do is that they will use goal setting, and they will encourage the client to take baby steps, and they will point out to the client the baby steps that they're successfully taking. And that's one of the ways in which they try and build their confidence, which is great, can I hasten to add. But I think it's also worth just adding in here maybe some additional ideas you may not have thought about before or may not have used, which you might find are additionally helpful in terms of building that particular building that particular confidence. And one of them is, in some ways, quite paradoxical. And will sound at first sight quite negative, even though its effect is the opposite. One of the things I'm always interested in exploring with my clients who basically have a strong belief that they can't do something, is to explore with them basically why things are not worse than they actually are. What it is that the client is actually doing which prevents things being worse. Now, why this is so powerful, can I emphasize, is that even when the client, and you, I would hasten to add, may hold a very strong belief that the client is not very competent, isn't able to do anything, and so on and so forth. All they can see, maybe all that you can see as well, is what the client can't do. What's really important to hold on to is the idea that things could always, whatever the circumstances are, could always be worse. And there's something that your client is doing, something which stops those things being worse. And I think a key role here is for you to explore with your client what it actually is that they're doing, which stops things being worse. Because, to be honest with you, if they could discover that, frequently, first of all, they will obviously believe that they're not really as bad as they first thought. But also, in addition to that, you're going to find that very often moving forward can actually be achieved simply by doing more of what the client's already doing. So to give you an example here, let's come back to weight loss. If someone, for instance, is putting on weight when they actually want to stabilize their weight or to lose their weight, and let's say, I don't know, over the last 4 weeks, they have put on 5 kilos. I think one of the really interesting questions to actually look at here is what it is that they've done that stopped them putting on 10 kilos. Because there's something that they've done that stopped them actually doing that. If you're working with somebody who is depressed, for example, and doesn't get out of bed until midday, the really interesting question to explore with them is why is it that they don't stay in bed until 2 o'clock in the afternoon? And for that particular client who says, well, I do that on some days. My answer to that is, yes, you do that on some days, but you don't do it every day. What is it that you do that stops you staying in bed until 2 in the afternoon on every day? And the follow-up question to that, by the way, is, and what do you do to do that? And what do you do to do that? A lot of the answers to this, by the way, are not rocket science. They're quite straightforward, and that too is very refreshing. It's not like the client is having to discover something new that they have to do. They're actually discovering something that they're already doing. And for that reason, of course, doing it more frequently is always going to be easier. So that you might want to look at that in terms of helping to build self-efficacy and confidence. The last thing that I just wanted to suggest in terms of trying to build that is to encourage people to describe what's broadly termed success behavior. Now, success behavior is the way in which the client would like to be behaving given the circumstances. Now, this is rarely, can I say, particularly sort of radical or extreme behavior. When you do ask clients how they'd like to be behaving, if then there's a number of ways into this. The miracle question is a common way into it, but it's not the only way. It is to say to somebody, if you woke up tomorrow and all your problems had gone, what would you be doing differently from what you're doing at the moment? And you ask the client to give you a detailed verbal description of it. I hope you notice that this is very different from someone who contacts you and says, I've had a really, really, really bad week. I've had a massive argument with my kids. And you say to them, really, what happened? And they say, oh, my son said so-and-so to me. And you say, well, what did you say? And I said so-and-so, and then what happened? And what you're actually doing, if you're not careful, is you are facilitating what is called failure behavior by a failure conversation. A really much more useful question to ask is, when that situation arose with your son, how would you have liked to behave? How would you, what would have been the way of behaving in that situation which you would like to be doing? And to ask for a detailed description of it. Now, you might think, well, what the heck does that do? How does that make a difference? Well, without going into, again, a great deal of the detail of it at the moment, we know that detailed verbal descriptions of motor behavior statistically increase the chances of somebody actually engaging in that behavior. So when someone gives us a detailed description of how they'd like to behave in a situation, it's much more likely that they will actually start doing this. Now, I'm not suggesting this is a panacea, it's not, but what it does, I think, in many ways, is it gives the client a different type of visual cognition to cognitively rehearse, rather than the usual failure imagery, which tends to occupy their mind. So you might want to do that as a way of approaching this issue as well. That's really all I've got to say at this particular point. But I'd love to hear about your issues with motivating clients, and I'm more than happy to, within the remaining time we've got, to answer any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. What I'll do now, as I always do, I'll unmute you all for a couple of seconds and then mute you again, but we'll give you a chance to unmute yourself if you have a question. Okay, so I'm unmuting you all right now. You can hear all the voices and see faces. And now I am muting you, but I'm allowing you to unmute yourself if you have a question. So if you have a question, speak loudly and we will pick you up. So please, do we have any video questions? Still very quiet. Don't forget to unmute yourself. If you are talking and you haven't unmuted yourself, we will not.
Julia?
Yes, yes.
I know this is a very basic question, but I haven't done this kind of training before. Can I ask Paul what the miracle question is, please?
Okay, so the miracle question is where you basically say to the client, I'd like you to do something which is going to sound very strange and very difficult, and take some imagination, but I'd like you to imagine that you go home tonight and you do whatever you do this evening and you go to bed and you go to sleep. And while you're asleep, a miracle happens. And all of the difficulties that you've got, all of them, just disappear, just like that. But the point is, of course, is that this miracle's occurred when you're asleep. How would you know when you wake up in the morning that something had changed? What would be the first thing that you would notice that had told you, or that would tell you this miracle had happened? And then what you do is you ask for, you drill down on the detail and you ask for basically a chronological description of how the person would be behaving differently.
Thank you, Paul. Can I just add, because lots of people picked up on the fact that Paul's presentation contained both elements of motivational interviewing and clearly solution-focused brief therapy. And we've noticed this similarity as well, and that is why we've combined them and added positive psychology on top as well. And we have a BPS-approved certificate on resource-based therapies, and they're all available online, all 3 courses. And they are really, really refreshing courses, and enable you to find the strength in your clients rather than the weaknesses. And another thing, the book which Paul have written, and I mentioned it in the beginning, actually draws on all of this, on motivational interviewing and solution-focused therapy, on CBT and positive therapy. So it's actually a very good way, that book, which is, I think it's £16 or something, it's a very good way of getting introduced to all these things in a very simple and accessible way. Do we have another question, guys?
I have a question.
Please.
Yeah. I just, what if your client knows all this and says she's too or he's too lazy? How do you deal with that? That is.
Well, that's really an interesting point, because I guess that this particular approach says that nobody is universally lazy, that people are basically always cease to be lazy when a particular benefit is important enough to them, or a particular negative consequence is important enough to them. And that if the person is currently not doing anything, it's not because it's a personality attribute that they're lazy. It's because basically the benefit that they're too comfortable in their current position, really. So there's 2 options there, really. I mean, let me just give you an example. Someone could be morbidly and grossly obese, and they spend a large amount of their time sitting on the sofa. But having said that, they can still move themselves around when, for example, they want to go and get a cigarette, or they want to go and buy food. So it's not like the person never moves. Equally, if the person, for example, suddenly found themselves in a situation where they actually had to stand all day, they would start actually doing more things. Now, I do appreciate there's an issue here about the degree of control there is about changing that comfort zone, and I do accept that. But I still think there are some things that we can help people to do to feel subjectively more uncomfortable. And I think that the whole process of personal change is fundamentally based on the need to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. But then feeling uncomfortable, you do a little bit, then the laziness sets in.
Life. That's life. So, you know, I mean, you do a little bit and the laziness sets in. So you need to remind yourself why it is that you need to have another go. You know, I mean, there's a lot of instances.
But this specific client that I had for quite a long time, and that was the issue. You know, life would get so uncomfortable, and she would do a little bit of change, and then she would get stuck in that way of being. And she always had such motivation, so many desires to become such a different person, and none of that kind of came about because of this laziness. And she said herself that I'm lazy. You know, this was kind of like she knows the issue. You know, so
one of my first questions I would ask this particular person is: you say that you're lazy, and yet somehow or other you have made a decision to continue seeing me.
Yeah,
Why?
No, I said
Why?
that 100 times.
And she would say, well, because I don't want to be like this for the rest of my life. And I would then say, well, why would that be such a bad thing for you? And so
her answer was, if I have an appointment, I will always keep. Supposing if she had to go to the doctor, or she was forced to see someone.
My next question would be, well, why would it be such a bad thing if you don't keep it?
Well, that was her said. She was saying, I make a very big effort if I have an appointment, and she was never late, always on time, always.
Fine.
You know, yeah.
So I still come back again, because in a sense, for want of a better term, her intrinsic conscientiousness about appointment keeping, I suspect, could be potentially generalizable to other things.
Mm-hmm.
So I would always try and I mean, I'm not trying to make this sound like it's easy, it's not. But at the end of the day, the best thing, really the only thing we can do with clients is to take what they've already got and help them to expand it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Okay.
Thank
you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's take one more question from the video because we are almost at the end of the session. So do we have another question?
If I can ask,
please.
I don't know. Yeah. Hello. I work with a client who is depressed. I had over 10 sessions with her, and I'm just wondering whether when you try to identify things that the client can do, if you stay focused on one thing. The issue I have with this client, we talk about the problem. She's single, she wants to find a partner, but she cannot get herself to do something about it, dating, online dating, things like that. So we identify what could be helpful, but then she finds problems that interfere in different areas. I have problems with my parents, I have problems with my brother, I have problems at work, and she brings all, it's like put a shadow on what we have done so far, and she's bringing new problem. And I struggle with keeping her focus. So I want to acknowledge, yeah, I understand your depression, and I understand you struggling in these other areas, but can we keep focusing on this? So do you redirect her? How do I approach this?
Okay, good example. Let me give you a metaphor for this. And it's the metaphor of somebody who is halfway up a mountain and is feeling exhausted and is wondering about whether to go on or not. Would it be helpful for that person to examine in detail all the different obstacles that exist between where they are at the moment and the peak of the mountain, and to have a conversation about how to overcome them? Or would it be more useful to simply look at where it is they eventually want to get to? And I would actually argue it's the latter. One of the difficulties with selectively attending to obstacles is that, well, it's a general part of selective attention, is the obstacles become bigger. So the obstacles actually cloud consciousness in that particular way. So what I would be more tempted to do would be to do two things. I would be concentrating on, well, first, actually, this is actually the most important thing, which you might find the most difficult. When your client starts talking about obstacles or goes into yes buts, you need to interrupt them.
Okay.
So you need to say quite clearly, this is important, but I'll come back to that later on, which you never do, by the way. And you then say, but given all these things you're up against, a lot of people would totally have given up. But here you are, still going online, still seeing me about this. What is it that you do that despite all of these difficulties, all this history you've got, all these possible things that might occur, what is it that you do that helps you to keep going?
Yeah.
So I would spend some time on that, and I would also ask her to describe to me not why having a partner would be nice, but I would ask, which incidentally is not what the miracle question is about. The miracle question is not about the description of the miracle. The miracle question is a description of how the person would be behaving differently as a result of the miracle.
Mm-hmm.
So if you did have a partner, how would you behave differently on a daily basis to the way you are at the moment? And very often what people begin to realize is that actually this different behavior, and can I just say, it's a different behavior which is actually the primary concern to the person. It's not just the fact that they want to have a partner. They don't want to be moping around. They want to do something with somebody. There's a lot of behavioral components in it. And a lot of those, not all, but a lot of those are maybe things which the person is actually able to do already. You know, as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of people have a lot of magical thinking about what a difference a partner will actually make.
Yeah.
And actually, so obviously it makes a difference, but it's not that there are things which are already there, the client's already doing, or if they're not doing them, they will actually suddenly sound to the client a lot more straightforward and easier than they first thought. This is radically different from you trying to persuade the client.
Yeah.
If you try and persuade the client, all the client's going to say is yes, but.
Yeah,
yes,
so this is my struggle, and I feel frustrated because we have only limited number of sessions, and I'm really questioning whether I can deal with clients when I have those sessions. And I know I have this tendency to listen to them and kind of it's difficult, but it's our time. So
sure.
Yeah.
Let me just say one final thing. There's a really great quotation, which is great if only because it comes from me, which is that we're more convinced by the things that come out of our mouths than out of the mouths of others.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, your role is to help the client tell you why change is a good thing.
Yeah.
Rather than you tell the client.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Yeah,
you're welcome.
A helpful idea. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you. We'll be closing the session now. And thank you very much, Paul. It was really interesting. And people ask me again to share the book title and everything. I'll do it very, very quickly. So can you see my screen? Yeah, can see my screen. So let's go into previous screen. Yes, the book is on Amazon, Practical Approaches to Motivating Clients. But if you put in the search, as you can see here in my search, you put Paul Grantham in the search, it appears on the first page. So it's very easy to find, and it is dispatched by Amazon and printed by Amazon. So it's on free delivery and done through Amazon. And I also wanted to very quickly let you know that next Thursday we have Lucy Maddox. If you attended the session with Andrew Beck, BABCP President-elect, he mentioned Lucy Maddox. They've written an article on behavioral activation together. And Lucy is going to do a very fascinating topic on compassion fatigue, which is incredibly topical right now. And then on the 21st of May, we are joined by Jeff Riggenbach from USA. Jeff is doing a course for us in June, but he agreed to join us on this free Zoom session. He is an author of a very popular book on CBT Toolkit, and he will be talking about working with difficult clients, and we're talking personality disorders and other seriously difficult clients in situations of pandemic and in situations of isolation. And these just remind us how to find us, how to join us, our website, our Facebook, and don't forget to join our group, Therapist Toolkit Support Resources and Networking on Facebook. It's just hit 1,000 tonight, didn't it, Paul?
It did
Yes.
indeed. We're for those of you that are already members, we're just so grateful. Thank you.
Yes. So as always, I'll unmute you all. Thank you very much. You can say goodbye now and see you next Thursday.
Great session. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye. Keep safe, everyone.